Teacher's challenge. He asked her to sing, but her voice stole his heart. The challenge. Grace Miller stood at the front of a classroom, her fingers dancing across the piano keys as her students practiced their scales. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Riverside High School, casting golden shadows across the music stands. This was her sanctuary, a place where she could hide behind the talents of others, nurturing voices while keeping her own locked away. "Beautiful work, everyone," she said softly. Her voice barely rose above the final chord. "Remember, confidence comes from preparation. Practice these exercises at home." As her students filed out, chattering about the upcoming school musical, Grace felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Every year, the same production buzz filled the halls, and every year, she managed to stay safely in the background, coaching from the shadows. "Ms. Miller?" A deep, unfamiliar voice interrupted her thoughts. Grace looked up to find a man standing in her doorway, tall, with dark hair slightly tousled, and eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischief. He wore a casual blazer over a graphic tee, an unusual combination that somehow worked perfectly on him. "I'm Ethan Matthews, the new drama teacher," he said, extending his hand with an easy smile. "I've heard incredible things about your music program." Grace accepted his handshake briefly, noticing the warmth of his grip. "Thank you. Welcome to Riverside." "I wanted to discuss the spring musical," Ethan continued, stepping into the room with the confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger. "I'm thinking of something ambitious this year, The Phantom of the Opera, and I need your help." Grace's stomach dropped. Phantom. A show that required a powerhouse vocalist for Christine. She already knew where this was going. "I can recommend several students," she began. "Actually," Ethan interrupted, his eyes brightening with enthusiasm, "I was hoping you might consider auditioning. I've heard rumors about your voice, Miss Miller. Whispers that you're hiding a secret talent." The room suddenly felt too small. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her sheet music. "I don't perform, Mr. Matthews. I teach." "Ethan, please," he corrected, moving closer. "And why not? What's the point of having a gift if you never share it?" "Because some gifts are better left wrapped," Grace replied, her voice sharper than intended. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. Ethan studied her for a moment, and Grace saw something shift in his expression. Not defeat, but intrigue. "There's a story there," he said quietly, "but I'm a patient man. Grace, may I call you Grace?" Before she could answer, he continued, "I'm not asking you to commit today. Just think about it. Sometimes, the stage isn't about performing for others. It's about finding yourself again." His words struck something deep within her, a chord she'd kept silent for 7 years, since the night her voice had failed her at the most crucial moment of her life. "I'll think about it," she heard herself say, surprising them both. Ethan's smile was radiant. "That's all I ask, for now." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "By the way, I believe the best music comes from the heart, not perfection. Something tells me your heart has quite a song to sing." As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Grace sank onto the piano bench, her reflection staring back at her from the polished black surface. Ethan Matthews had been in her life for less than 10 minutes, and already he had shaken the carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself. Her fingers found the keys automatically, playing the opening notes of Think of Me from Phantom. The melody filled the empty classroom, each note a memory of who she used to be, before the betrayal, before the silence, before she had learned that showing your true voice meant giving someone the power to destroy it. But as the last chord faded, Grace couldn't shake the image of Ethan's eyes, full of challenge and something else. Genuine interest, not just in her voice, but in the mystery of why she'd hidden it. Perhaps, she thought with equal parts terror and excitement, it was time to find out if her voice still existed beneath all these years of silence.
Breaking barriers. The following weeks became a careful dance between resistance and curiosity. Ethan seemed to appear everywhere Grace turned, in the faculty lounge, at department meetings, and most persistently, lingering outside her classroom as her students practiced their pieces. "You're avoiding me," he said one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe with that infuriatingly charming smile. Grace looked up from the sheet music she was annotating. "I'm working, Mr. Matthews. Some of us have students who require our attention." "Ethan," he corrected, for what must have been the 10th time, "and I notice you didn't deny the avoiding part." He walked into the room, his presence somehow making the spacious classroom feel intimate. "I've cast most of the musical, everyone except Christine." "Then I suggest you hold open auditions," Grace replied, keeping her eyes on her work, though the notes had begun to blur. "I did. 3 times." Ethan sat on the edge of her desk, too close for comfort. "Talented students, all of them, but none with the depth, the emotional maturity this role requires." "Grace, I've heard you humming when you think no one's listening. I've caught fragments of your voice during warm-ups. You have something special." "Had," Grace corrected quietly, finally meeting his gaze. Past tense. Ethan's expression softened. What happened? The question hung between them, heavy with years of pain Grace had never shared with anyone at Riverside. She stood abruptly, moving to the window overlooking the school's courtyard. 7 years ago, I was engaged. Marcus was a music producer in New York. I was performing regularly, building a career. He convinced me to audition for a major Broadway production, said it would be my big break. The night before my final callback, I found him with my understudy, in our apartment. She was more than just sleeping with him. He'd been feeding her my arrangements, my interpretations, everything that made my audition unique. The next day, I walked into that theater and she trailed off. The memory still raw. My voice failed, completely. I couldn't produce a single note. She got the part. They got each other. I got a one-way ticket to nowhere. "And you buried your voice with the pain," Ethan said softly, now standing beside her. "Grace, that's not losing your voice, that's having it stolen." She turned to him, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. "You don't understand." "Don't I?" He moved closer, his voice passionate but gentle. "I came here from Chicago. I was directing at a prestigious theater company until my best friend, my creative partner, took credit for a production I'd spent 2 years developing. The board believed him. I was labeled difficult, unreliable. So yes, Grace, I understand betrayal. I understand wanting to hide." Grace felt tears pricking in her eyes. "Then why push me? Why not let me stay safe?" "Because hiding isn't living," Ethan said, his hand reaching up to gently wipe away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch sent electricity through her body. "Because talent like yours deserves to be heard. And because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "Because in the few weeks I've known you, I've seen glimpses of the real Grace Miller, the woman who lights up when discussing music theory, who stays late to help struggling students, who hums Puccini when she's grading papers. That woman deserves to sing again." Their faces were inches apart now. Grace could feel her heart pounding, her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Then be terrified with me beside you. No pressure, no audience at first. Just you, me, and the music. Let me help you find your voice again, Grace. Not for the musical, not for the students, for you." Grace searched his eyes, finding only sincerity and something else, something that made her breath catch. When had someone last looked at her like she mattered beyond her usefulness? "One session. Private. If I can't do it, you promise to drop this." Ethan's smile was brilliant. One session. Tonight, after school, the auditorium will be empty. As he left, Grace slumped into her chair, wondering what she'd just agreed to. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something that had been dormant for 7 years. Hope.
The unveiling. The auditorium was bathed in soft stage lights when Grace arrived that evening, her hands trembling as she clutched her music folder. Ethan was already there, sitting at the piano on stage, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up as he played through the opening measures of Think of Me. "You play?" Grace observed, surprised as she climbed the stage steps. "Another thing we have in common," Ethan replied, his fingers never faltering, "though I suspect you're far more skilled. I've seen your arrangements for the students. They're brilliant." Grace set her folder down, her anxiety rising with each step closer to the piano. "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan." He stopped playing and turned to face her fully. "Then we start smaller. Talk to me. Tell me about the first time you fell in love with singing." The unexpected question caught Grace off guard. She sank onto the piano bench beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. "I was 8. My grandmother took me to see The Sound of Music. Maria's voice," she smiled at the memory. "It was like watching someone speak directly to heaven. I knew then that's what I wanted, to touch people's souls with music."
shadows, and spotlight. The next morning, Grace arrived at school with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Her voice had returned, and with it, something even more precious, the possibility of love. She caught herself humming as she arranged sheet music for her first class, a smile playing at her lips as she remembered Ethan's kiss, the way he'd looked at her like she was the most extraordinary thing she'd ever witnessed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Still floating from last night. Coffee before first period? We need to discuss rehearsal schedules and maybe steal another moment alone. Grace's heart fluttered as she typed her response. But before she could send it, her classroom door burst open. Principal Richardson stood there, his usually jovial face etched with concern, and beside him, Margaret Chen, the school board's liaison, and a woman notorious for her rigid adherence to protocol. "Ms. Miller," Richardson began, his voice apologetic, "we need to speak with you. Now." Grace's stomach dropped. "Of course. What's this about?" Margaret stepped forward, her tablet already extended. "This arrived in the school board's inbox this morning. Anonymous sender." On the screen was a photograph. Grace and Ethan on the auditorium stage, locked in their kiss, her hands in his hair, his cradling her face. The image was intimate, unmistakable, damning. "We also received a video," Margaret continued, swiping to show Grace singing, tears streaming down her face, with Ethan watching her with obvious adoration. The sender claims this represents an inappropriate relationship between faculty members that violates professional boundaries. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. That was a private rehearsal. Someone was spying on us? "The how is less important than the what," Margaret said coldly. "Miss Miller, you understand that faculty relationships, while not explicitly forbidden, must be disclosed and cannot interfere with professional duties. This appears to show a level of intimacy that raises questions about judgment and propriety." "Nothing inappropriate has happened," Grace protested, even as her mind raced. Who would do this? Who had been watching? Principal Richardson cleared his throat. "Grace, no one is accusing you of misconduct, but given that you'll be performing in Mr. Matthews' production, the optics are concerning. The board is worried about potential favoritism allegations, about what message this sends to students." "The message it sends," came Ethan's voice from the doorway, making them all turn, "is that teachers are human beings capable of genuine connection. Grace has agreed to perform because of her extraordinary talent, not because of any personal relationship. If you'd heard her sing, you'd understand." Margaret's expression hardened. "Mr. Matthews, this is exactly the problem. You're already defensive, already prioritizing personal feelings over professional discretion. The board is considering whether you both should step back from the production." "No," Grace said firmly, surprising even herself. For 7 years, she had hidden. She had played it safe. She had let fear dictate her choices. Not anymore. "No. Whoever sent you that photo and video is trying to sabotage us. They invaded our privacy and are now weaponizing a moment of connection to destroy something beautiful." She moved to stand beside Ethan, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm performing in this musical, not because of any relationship, but because Mr. Matthews helped me rediscover a part of myself I thought was lost forever. If the board has a problem with two adults developing feelings while maintaining absolute professionalism, then perhaps the board needs to examine their priorities." Richardson looked uncomfortable, but there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes. Margaret, however, remained unmoved. "Very passionate, Ms. Miller, but the board requires accountability. You'll both be monitored closely during rehearsals. Any hint of impropriety, and you'll be removed from the production. Additionally, you're required to attend a professional boundary seminar next week. Consider this your formal warning." As they left, Grace's bravado crumbled. She turned to Ethan, seeing her own frustration mirrored in his face. "Someone is trying to destroy this before it even begins," she whispered. "Who would do this?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "I have a suspicion. Victoria Brennan." Grace blinked. "Your assistant director? But why?" "Because before you agreed to perform, she was angling to take the role herself. She's been dropping hints for weeks, and when I told her yesterday that we'd found our Christine, she was furious." Ethan ran his hair through his hair, frustrated. "I should have seen this coming." "We don't know it was her," Grace said, though doubt gnawed at her. "But I intend to find out." Ethan's eyes met hers, intense and protective. "Grace, I won't let anyone hurt you. Not again. We'll prove that our relationship doesn't compromise the production. We'll make it so good, so professional, that no one can question it." Grace wanted to believe him, but fear was creeping back in. "Maybe we should step back, just until the show is over. We could hide?" Ethan interrupted gently. "Play it safe? Grace, last night you took the biggest risk of your life, and you were magnificent. Don't let them push you back into the shadows." He took her hands in his, despite the risk that someone might see. "I'm falling in love with you, Grace Miller. And yes, the timing is complicated and messy and potentially disastrous for both our careers. But I refuse to apologize for feeling this way, and I refuse to let whoever sent that photo win." Grace's breath caught. Love. He said love. Her heart wanted to soar, but her mind screamed warnings. Marcus said he loved her too, right before destroying her. "I'm scared. Not just of the board, or whoever's trying to sabotage us. I'm scared of this, of us. Of letting you in and discovering it was all." "I'm not Marcus," Ethan said firmly. "I won't betray you, Grace. I won't hurt you or use you or steal from you. But I can't prove that with words. I can only prove it with time, with actions, with choosing you every single day." Before Grace could respond, students began filing into her classroom, their chatter breaking the intimate moment. Ethan squeezed her hands once more before stepping back, professional distance restored. "Rehearsal tonight," he said, his voice carefully neutral for the students' benefit. 7 p.m. We start blocking Act 1. As Ethan left, Grace turned to face her class, trying to compose herself. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere in the school, someone was plotting their next move. That evening's rehearsal was tense. Victoria Brennan was overly helpful, her smile too bright, her comments just sharp enough to sting. When Grace took the stage to run through Think of Me for the first time with the full cast, she felt Victoria's eyes boring into her, critical and cold. But when Grace began to sing, everything else fell away. Her voice soared through the auditorium, carrying 7 years of pain and newfound hope. The students watched in awe, and even Victoria's expression flickered with something. Jealousy, yes, but also grudging respect. As the final note faded, applause erupted. Grace looked to Ethan, who stood at the back of the auditorium, his face illuminated by the stage lights, and saw tears in his eyes. "That," he called out, his voice thick with emotion, "is what we're building this production around. Grace, you're not just our Christine, you're our inspiration." The students cheered, and for a moment, Grace allowed herself to believe it could work. But as she exited the stage, she found a note tucked into her music folder, written in elegant script. "Enjoy it while it lasts. People who reach for the spotlight usually end up burning. Some secrets are better left buried, Miss Miller. Yours, especially." Grace's hands trembled as she read it. Whoever was targeting them knew about her past, about Marcus, about the shame she had carried for 7 years, and they were threatening to expose it all.
Looking up, she met Ethan's concerned gaze across the auditorium. He'd seen her expression change, seen the note in her hands. As students milled around them, planning and laughing, oblivious to the storm gathering, Grace realized their battle was just beginning. The question was, would their growing love be strong enough to weather what was coming? Or would the shadows of the past destroy their chance at a future?
The performance. The weeks leading to opening night were a blur of tension and triumph. Grace threw herself into rehearsals with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. Every note she sang was an act of defiance against whoever was trying to silence her again. Anonymous notes continued to appear, cryptic warnings tucked into her sheet music, disturbing messages left on her windshield. Each one hinted at her past, at Marcus, at the humiliation she'd endured. But Grace refused to break. Not this time. Ethan became her anchor. Despite the scrutiny from the administration and Victoria's increasingly obvious attempts to undermine Grace's performance, he remained steadfast. Their relationship evolved in stolen moments, coffee before dawn in empty classrooms, whispered conversations in the wings during rehearsals, his hand finding hers in the darkness of the auditorium when no one was watching. "I traced the IP address of the emails sent to the board," Ethan told her one evening, 2 days before opening night. They were alone in the costume room, ostensibly checking the final alterations on her dress. "It was routed through multiple servers, but I have a tech-savvy friend who owes me a favor." "Grace, it wasn't Victoria." Grace looked up from the intricate beadwork on her Christine gown. "Then who?" Ethan's expression was grim. "The original email came from a New York IP address, from someone at the Berkshire Theater Company." Grace's blood ran cold. "That's where Marcus works. He's their head producer now." "I think he's been monitoring you," Ethan said carefully. "I found your name on several industry watch lists, people tracking promising talent who dropped out of the scene. Someone's been keeping tabs on your career, or lack thereof. When you agreed to perform again, even in a high school production, it triggered something." "He wants to keep me silent," Grace whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Even after 7 years, even here, he can't let me have this." "But why?" Ethan moved closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "What power does your voice have over him that he'd go to such lengths?" Grace sank onto the costume room's worn sofa. Years of buried truth finally demanding release. "The song I sang at that audition, the one where my voice failed, wasn't just any song. It was an original composition I'd written. Marcus knew how personal it was, how much of my soul I'd poured into it. After I left New York, I heard my understudy perform it on opening night. They'd stolen more than just the role. They'd stolen my voice, my words, my heart. And Marcus built his reputation on that stolen song." Ethan's face transformed with understanding and rage. "He's afraid you'll expose him. If you perform successfully now, if you find your voice again, you might decide to reclaim what's yours." "I don't want to reclaim it," Grace said bitterly. "I just want to be free of him. I want to sing without his shadow following me. I want to love you without wondering if I'm making another catastrophic mistake." Ethan knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Grace, look at me. Marcus wins if you let fear silence you again. But if you step onto that stage Friday night and sing your heart out, you're not just performing, you're declaring that he no longer has power over you." "And us?" Grace asked, her voice breaking. "What about us, Ethan? The board is watching, Marcus is lurking, Victoria is waiting for us to fail. How do we survive this?" "By being honest," Ethan said firmly, "by standing together and refusing to hide. Tomorrow, I'm requesting a meeting with Principal Richardson. I'm going to formally disclose our relationship, explain that it developed after you agreed to perform, and make it clear that it doesn't compromise the production's integrity. Let them investigate. Let them scrutinize. We have nothing to hide." Grace searched his eyes, finding only certainty and love. "You'd risk your career for this?
For us? I'd risk everything, Ethan said simply, because Grace, in these past weeks, you've taught me something I'd forgotten, that art without vulnerability is just technique, that love without risk is just safety. And I didn't come back to teaching to play it safe. I came back to feel alive again. You make me feel alive. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks as she pulled him close, kissing him with all the fear and hope and love she'd been holding back. When they broke apart, both were breathless. Okay, Grace whispered, we face this together. Tomorrow we talk to Richardson, Friday I perform, and after that, Ethan finished, we figure out the rest. Together. Friday night arrived with the weight of inevitability. The auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, parents, and local press drawn by word of mouth about the music teacher who'd emerged from obscurity to take the lead role. Backstage, Grace's hands trembled as she adjusted her costume, her makeup unable to completely hide the exhaustion from sleepless nights. The meeting with Richardson had gone better than expected. The principal, impressed by their honesty and the production's clear professionalism, had agreed to advocate with the board. But Victoria's final act of sabotage was more personal. She'd somehow contacted Marcus, who had sent a letter threatening legal action if Grace performed any original material, claiming she'd signed away those rights years ago. 5 minutes, Miss Miller, the state's manager called. Grace closed her eyes, centering herself. She decided not to tell Ethan about Marcus's letter, not yet. Tonight was about reclamation, about proving to herself that her voice and her heart could survive anything. The overture began, and Grace took her position. As the curtain rose, she stepped into the light, and for one terrifying moment, the old panic surged. The audience was a sea of faces, judging, waiting, expecting. Her throat tightened, the first words of her opening song frozen behind her lips. Then, from the wings, she heard Ethan's voice, barely a whisper, but clear. Breathe, Grace. This is your moment. Take it back. Grace drew a breath and began to sing. Her voice started soft but grew stronger with each measure, filling the auditorium with a clarity and power that silenced every doubt. She wasn't singing as Christine, she was singing as herself. Every note a declaration of freedom, every phrase a rejection of the fear that had imprisoned her. The audience was spellbound. By the time she reached the famous Phantom of the Opera duet, performing opposite a talented senior playing the Phantom, Grace had transcended the role. She was pure emotion, pure artistry, 7 years of silence exploding into magnificent sound. In the wings, Ethan watched with tears streaming down his face, his heart so full it physically ached. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, not the quiet, reserved teacher, but this fierce, vulnerable, extraordinary artist who chose courage over comfort. The final scene arrived, Christine's ultimate choice between the Phantom's obsessive darkness and Raoul's uncomplicated love. As Grace sang, "All I Ask of You," she found Ethan's eyes in the wings, and suddenly the words weren't just lyrics. They were a promise, a commitment, a choice. Let me be your shelter. Let me be your light. The final curtain fell to thunderous applause. Grace stood center stage, overwhelmed as the audience rose to their feet. Students were crying, faculty members stunned, and in the back row, Grace spotted Principal Richardson standing and applauding, a broad smile on his face. But the moment that mattered most came when Ethan bounded onto the stage during the curtain call, pulling Grace into an embrace that wasn't quite professional, kissing her forehead as the audience cheered louder. "Let them see," his gesture said. "Let them know." As the cast took their final bows and the curtain closed, Grace finally allowed herself to collapse against Ethan, exhaustion and triumph warring within her. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "You were magnificent." "We did it," Grace corrected, pulling back to look at him. "I couldn't have done this without you, Ethan. You gave me back more than my voice. You gave me back myself." "And you," Ethan said, cupping her face in his hands, "gave me a reason to believe in love again, in art again, in everything again." Their kiss was interrupted by students mobbing them, congratulations flowing, but Grace and Ethan remained locked together, an island of certainty in the chaos. Later, as the auditorium emptied and cast members departed, Grace and Ethan sat alone on the edge of the stage, still in costume, surrounded by the remnants of their triumph. "I got an email during intermission," Grace said quietly. "From Marcus." Ethan tensed. "What did it say?" "He congratulated me. Said he'd heard about my performance through the industry grapevine, and that he was proud." Grace laughed bitterly. "After everything, after trying to silence me, he wants to claim some credit for my success. He actually suggested we reconnect to discuss future opportunities." "Tell me you're not considering it," Ethan said, though his voice held no real fear. Grace turned to him, her smile genuine and free. "I deleted it. Marcus doesn't get to be part of my story anymore. That chapter is closed. I'm ready for a new beginning." "With me?" Ethan asked, vulnerable despite everything. "With you," Grace confirmed. "If you're willing to take on a complicated, sometimes terrified, recently rediscovered soprano with trust issues and a penchant for falling in love with persistent drama teachers." Ethan's